Is this okay?
Everything looks great. How's that look to you? Good?
Good to me.
Great.
Here, Mark.
Whatever you guys want.
It's me and Janine with George Clooney.
But he wasn't really there.
He was there.
He was.
We saw his play.
Oh, in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that's
Is it
really
black and
good.
white for the
Good night,
Is that the Edward R. Murrow?
good night, and good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this guy came out, and I've seen him in plays many times. This guy, he's in the play.
That's very
He was married to Jennifer Grey for 20 years. So he's been in a lot of movies. And,
You ready to start? Or?
yeah. We went there because it was today's Emily's birthday.
Is she there?
Yeah. She flew in from Italy. Now she's back. She's already back in Florence now. So, all right. Sorry. Let's go. You ready?
Yep. I am
Okay.
ready.
Go.
Got it.
All right.
Before we start, what is your first and last name and your title? Both now and with the Orioles.
Jon, Jon Miller, Orioles broadcaster when Camden Yards opened in 2000. What year was that? 1991? 92. 91 was the last year at Memorial Stadium. Okay. So is that what you were looking for? Okay, good.
My first question is, what were your expectations of Camden Yards going into opening day, and did the experience live up to your expectations?
There was a lot of anticipation for the new ballpark. A lot of people were kind of freaked out that they kept thinking that because the owner of the team, Edward Bennett Williams, was a Washingtonian, that he was always looking to move the team to Washington. What they didn't seem to realize, and maybe eventually they did get that the city of Baltimore and the baseball fans won him over in 1979 when they turned up in record numbers, and the Orioles won the pennant and went to the World Series that year. And he had just come in as the owner of the ball club, so he really thought this is a great scene, and eventually they're going to need a new ballpark. Now, he was also dying of cancer most of the time that he owned the Orioles, so people were very concerned that he had not made a deal to either extend the lease at Camden Yards, which I think he did not do that because he wanted a new ballpark. And ultimately, and I'll never forget the night, and nobody who was there will ever forget the night, the year 1988, the Orioles had lost 21 games in a row to start the year, the all-time record for futility at the start of a baseball season. They ended that in Chicago, won a game, and promptly lost the next two, and they came home on a Monday night to play Texas at Memorial Stadium with a record of 1-23. Now, in a grassroots sort of a thing that started with a disc jockey named Bob Rivers, they sold out Memorial Stadium that night, which that doesn't happen on a Monday night with Texas in town, much less for a team that is 1-23. But before the game, William Donald Schaefer, who was the former mayor of Baltimore, now by that time I think he was the governor of Maryland, he had been with Edward Bennett Williams negotiating, and they had come to an agreement about building a new ballpark for the Orioles. And Edward Bennett Williams, who would pass away not long after all of that, he signed it, which I always kept asking people, why would he sign it? He's about to die. But when he signed it, it sort of ensured that the Orioles were going to be there for a long, long time to come. So Governor Schaefer went out on the field. Here's this huge crowd there, and it's a noisy crowd. That game always felt to me like it was Game 7 of the World Series. And he made the announcement that he had just come from Edward Bennett Williams, who had just signed this new agreement for whatever it was, 20 years, 30 years to come, with a new ballpark being built for the Orioles. And so he was there to tell all of them, thanks for coming tonight, and we have secured the Orioles here for the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland for many, many years to come. So from that night forward, then we were all eagerly anticipating the arrival of this beautiful new ballpark.
So the actual day itself on opening day, the atmosphere of that day, how did the expectations of what you thought it would be live up to your expectations?
Well, just before opening day, the Orioles came back to town from spring training in Florida. And we got in, and I can't remember, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Frank Robinson, the great Hall of Famer, he was the manager of the team. So when we came to Camden Yards, all the guys got off the buses, went into the clubhouse, and they're seeing it for the first time. And then everybody promptly, the clubhouse was palatial compared to the old clubhouse in the old Memorial Stadium. So they were all very impressed by that, like, wow, okay, I want that one. Then they went through the tunnel from the clubhouse to get the look at the field. And I don't know if it was because it was the night before the first game or what. And it wasn't even going to be opening day. They played a game against the Mets, an exhibition game, as a dry run for everybody. All the people, the ushers, the security, the parking lot attendants, the people in the concession stand, everybody to find out where they were going to be and how it was going to work. They purposely did not sell it out. They had it about 2/3 full because they thought a lot of things could go wrong. So they had about 33, 34, 35,000 for the Mets game and had this dry run. And then we had opening day. But the thing that lingers in my mind was when all of the players, Frank Robinson, and especially I was interested in Frank Robinson because he was such a great player, one of the all-time great players in Orioles history and in the history of the game. But when we walked out, the lights were on, and there was the big warehouse out in right field. That's the first thing you noticed, is this beautiful ballpark and this huge brick warehouse, which was a relic of the 19th century and which was a key to the architecture of Camden Yards. But everybody was looking at that like, wow, this place is unbelievable. And Frank Robinson, first thing he wanted to know is, what are the dimensions? And I think it was 318 to the right field corner, but it was a fairly high wall, a la Fenway Park, but not as high as the wall at Fenway. But right field gave the little Fenway impression with the short porch out there. And right center, that seemed to be reachable. Left center seemed to be very reachable. And the deepest part of the ballpark was not straightaway center, but a little bit to the left of that. So that was the main thing for Frank was what are the dimensions, how's it going to play? And we couldn't tell all that just from standing there. You had to play some games with the wind blowing and see how the ball carried under game conditions.
And then what about the fans themselves? Multiple articles have described the atmosphere as charged. Would you agree? How was it to you?
Absolutely. And talk about anticipation. The fans saw all the pictures. The New York Times sent their architecture critic, not from the sports pages, but from the newspaper itself. And he came down and got a tour of Camden Yards and got all the lowdown on why it was built the way it was built. And then he wrote this glowing review of Camden Yards, that this is the standard now. This will forever change all baseball stadium architecture from here on. They'll all take their cues from this ballpark. And this is the greatest ballpark that's been built in baseball, probably going back to Yankee Stadium, was his opinion, from back in the 20s. So that's a pretty glowing review from the big city itself. And then the Today Show came down, and they originated their show from Camden Yards. And so the morning of opening day, there was the Today Show at Camden Yards, and they're showing all the aspects of the ballpark, all the cool things about the ballpark that made it different and unique from any other ballpark that was out there. But the fans then were excited and sort of took a lot of pride in, like, wow, we're here in Baltimore and we really have done this right. This is something to be proud of. So they started calling the ticket office. They wanted to buy tickets because they wanted to see this ballpark. Well, then they won opening day, 1-0, and wow! And Rick Sutcliffe had been brought in. Mike Messina, the year before, had come up, and it was clear from his first game that he was going to be a future ace for the Orioles. But they didn't want to put all of that on his shoulders with so little experience. So they got a veteran, Rick Sutcliffe, and then Sutcliffe goes out and pitches a masterpiece on opening day. Well, now people, they want tickets. They want to see the ballpark. Well, sorry, there are no tickets available until July. And now they say, well, okay, well, how about July? Well, what about for the Yankees? Oh, sorry, those are gone. How about the Red Sox? Sorry, those are gone. Even later in the season, yeah, they're all gone for the year. And so it was just started taking off. It was all building one thing, the excitement about the ballpark, seeing the ballpark, experiencing the ballpark, and then excitement about the team. Like, this is a team, this is going to be a good team. And they still had the residual from 3 years before, when the team went from worst to first for most of the season and was not eliminated from contention until the day before the final game. So that was a lot of young guys on that team. So they were still very excited, and a lot of those guys were still on the team. So that was all going on there. And from the very early days, you could not get a ticket to see a game there if you weren't already, before the season ever started, unless you'd already bought them. So there was a real scarcity, even though it was a big ballpark. There were 48,000 seats out there.
And then you had the opportunity, you drew the attention of George H.W. Bush. You got to meet him on a brief stint on TV for play-by-play. You mentioned his baseball career, his batting average. What was that interaction?
Well, we had the first George Bush came out for the first ball ceremony. There was no team in Washington, and there had not been for a long, long time. So for the presidential first pitch ceremony on opening day, that always used to take place in Washington, D.C., Baltimore had become the place. I remember when I first came to the Orioles at Memorial Stadium, 1983, one of those years, I don't remember if it was my first year there or whatever it was, but Ronald Reagan came over, and he threw out the first pitch, and you know, he did that a couple of times, and George Bush came over, and George Bush, the one thing I do remember was George Bush threw one in the dirt. Now he's got bulletproof vests on and all, you know, he's got a few things that are working against him out there, and it was cool because he threw the pitch and he bounced it in, and you know, whoever was the guy catching it caught the ball, and he was like, oh, you know, and he looked like he was so unhappy with it, but it was kind of cool that he made an issue out of it. But and I remember that and I can't remember if that was the first one. We played the Texas Rangers, and I was on the field for the ceremonies, introducing the lineups and whatever the people they wanted to have introduced. Then when I was done and they were going to go to the anthem, then I beat it out of there to try to get up to the booth in time for the start of the game. But now when the president's there, they closed everything, so I can't go up because the Secret Service has closed it all off. So I'm like, well, so much for that. So now, and again, maybe I'm sort of conflating that with another opening day, but I'm just standing there at the elevator landing, and the president comes by with Secret Service, and his son, the future president, was the owner of the Texas Rangers, the president of the Texas Rangers, and he came by, he's with his dad, and they get on the elevator, and the son, W. Bush, the future president, says, John, don't you need to get up to start the broadcast? I said, well, sorry, but the Secret Service says when you all have gone up, then later I can go up. And he says, oh, well, guys, he needs to come up now. And he turns to his dad and says, Jon Miller, he's the broadcaster, he needs to go up now. Is that all right with you? And he's like, oh, come on. And he's standing in the back, yeah, come on. So I was kind of, you could hardly help but be a fan at that point. That they said, yeah, get it. And so I was able to start the game right at the beginning. And then the president did come on with us, and I was on TV that day, and Brooks was with me. And so I said, now, Brooksy, on that first pitch, and he says, I'm not sure I like where you're going with this. He says, no, Brooksy said that it was like a pitcher with a good slider, throwing a slider in the dirt on a 2-strike count to get the strikeout. And he's like, yeah. Well, that wasn't it, but I'll go with that. So anyway, but he was a fan. You know, he kept his old first baseman's glove from his baseball days at Yale in the Oval Office when he was president, and a picture of him meeting Babe Ruth at some game with the Yankees and Yale, some exhibition game, and so we all knew that he was a huge fan. So there was no question about that, and you could talk to him about the game, and he knew really what was going on.
Can we talk about more than just your broadcasting experience, because that wasn't your only role that day. You were the master of ceremonies for multiple pregame ceremonies. How was that experience? Were you nervous at all? What went on?
Well, at Camden Yards, because everybody was so proud of that the Orioles had done it right. The White Sox had built a new ballpark the year before. Even though they broke ground maybe a couple of weeks apart from when the Orioles broke ground. And the White Sox were interested in getting that ballpark open as soon as possible. I was told that from somebody with the architectural firm that was involved in the building of both, that the difference was the Orioles told them, listen, we want to get this right, and there's no hurry. So as long as it takes to make sure that we get something that everybody can be proud of and that's going to stand the test of time. Whereas the White Sox built theirs, the idea was, we need this opened up as soon as possible. That every day it's not open is a day we're losing money. So the White Sox built, it was a nice ballpark, there's nothing wrong with it. But the ballpark that opened the next year, it broke new ground, and all new building in baseball did, just as the New York Times architecture critic had predicted. It all came from Camden Yards. It changed everything, and everybody wanted to have a Camden Yards in their city.
So what was your role as master of ceremonies on that day? Pre-game, opening day, 1992. What were you doing?
My role was no different than any other opening day, which, it's always about the pomp, and they have the red, white, and blue bunting adorning the stands, and each, the facing of the lower deck, the second deck, the upper deck, and but I think also the thing that everybody wanted to point out were some of the features of this new ballpark. And Janet Marie Smith, and you probably have either talked to her or will talk to her, but she was sort of a key in that. She was a blank canvas where if the Orioles had said to her, the greatest park ever built was Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, and we want you to find out, which of course is just the opposite of reality, but she would have not said anything about it. She would say, oh, okay, great. Because she was not a baseball fan. She was not somebody who grew up thinking about Fenway Park or Wrigley Field or Ebbets Field or, baseball in general. So they said, Ebbets Field hasn't existed since 1957, and yet people still cherish the memories of it. Wrigley Field is an old ballpark from its era, and Fenway Park, same thing. From that era, all those other ballparks have been torn down and new ballparks put in their place, and yet those parks are cherished. We want you to go do the research and find out why were they built the way they were built, and why people loved them so much. So she went to the architectural firms back in the day that still exist, that built those ballparks, and they went into their archives, and not just all the blueprints, but also the letters back and forth between the ball club and the architects about what they wanted, what they were trying to do. And so she came in and she said, you know, the key to the whole deal is that warehouse, the old B&O warehouse out there. Because a lot of people, me included, thought that the warehouse should be torn down because beyond that was the city skyline and the Inner Harbor, a showplace in Baltimore. And we all thought, man, why wouldn't you want to showcase all of that from the ballpark?
Was that the first thing that stood out to you when you stepped into Camden Yards, that big brick warehouse?
It was absolutely, the moment I saw it that first night when we got in from spring training, your eyes were drawn to it. It looked so huge behind the right field wall, and it made everything look like it was miniature. It was just, and in my mind's eye, my memory of it, it looked like that warehouse was 25 stories high. And it made right field look like it was 150 feet from home plate. It just hovered over everything. So, but she said, that gives you the reason for odd dimensions and the architectural shadings of the park. You can take the brickwork from that 19th century warehouse and the archways in that warehouse and duplicate the bricks and the archways on the outer facade of the ballpark. Because Fenway Park was built in a certain time and it followed the architectural ideas of that time in that neighborhood. And Fenway looks just like the buildings that are outside of Fenway. People always say when they see Fenway, it looks like an old textile mill from the early 20th century. And Wrigley Field, same thing. So she said, that gives you the same rationale as those ballparks for that look. People always use the term retro ballpark. And for me, they didn't actually understand that it was not retro in any way. It was built authentically the same way that Ebbets Field and Wrigley Field and Fenway Park were built for the architectural attitudes in the neighborhood. And so there they were. The ballpark was brand new when we all walked in there for the first time, right next to this warehouse from the 19th century, over 100 years and something old. And yet they looked like they'd been there side by side for 100 years. So also because you kept that and you kept Utah Street as a promenade in the ballpark, that gave you the rationale for odd dimensions. There's a street that's been there since the 1800s, Utah Street. And it's still there between the ballpark and the warehouse, just like it's always been. So now you've got Boob's Barbecue out there, which was a part of the pregame ceremonies, sort of telling everybody what's where and all the, I want to run out there to Utah Street and have some Boob's Barbecue. He's right over there and whatever. But so I think for Janet Marie Smith, though, those were all the things that she saw. Because if they'd asked me, why were they built the way they were built, I would have told them. I felt like I would already know that. But she actually did the work and found specifically why. And I think one thing in San Francisco, when they built their ballpark on the shores of San Francisco Bay, they took some of the same things that she had found out and incorporated them into their ballpark for the odd dimensions and the look and all that kind of stuff. Same idea. So Janet Marie Smith has had so much influence, even though that's not what she's all about and what she's been trying to do, but she, by extension, has had so much influence on all the baseball architecture of the last 35 years.
Sure. Okay. Josh, get you on the chair. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
So just stay the same way, or?
Same
Okay.
way. Just
Okay.
You
All
and I
right. All right.
conversation.
All right.
So from your standpoint as a broadcaster,
You touched about it a little bit earlier. Camden Yards versus Memorial Stadium. How did the two compare?
Memorial Stadium, the most notable things about Memorial Stadium, because it was an old ballpark that was built the way those ballparks were built. It had the big supporting poles, the girders. So there were seats in the lower deck that had obstructed views. I grew up with Candlestick Park in San Francisco, which was a similar era and built the same way and had those same poles. And my dad would take us to games in the 60s. And often as not, we would, especially when there was going to be a big crowd, you had to take what you could get, whatever seats were still available. And I remember sitting on that lower deck, back a little bit from the field, in what they call the reserve seats. And here's the pitcher. We're over on the third base side. There's the pitcher. There's a big pole. And then there's the batter. The pitcher would throw, and the ball would disappear behind this pole, and then we'd see the batter either swing or take. So that was weird. And somewhere along the way, people felt like, we got to get rid of those poles. People don't like that. Although some of the architects who built these old ballparks argued that if you put the poles in, the upper deck and whatnot could be closer to the field. When the White Sox built their new ballpark, it opened the year before Camden Yards, it was pointed out that the first row of the upper deck at the new White Sox park, the first row of the upper deck was further from home plate than the last row of the upper deck at the ancient Comiskey Park that had opened 100 years before. So that's part of the difference. It had those poles, and the new Comiskey didn't. They built with the cantilevered effect. So, but I think Memorial Stadium, one of the main features about that park was that you had the corner walls that were only like, 314 feet from home plate, and the walls were extra high, like 14 feet high, and then they angled out very abruptly from the corners. And then maybe 40 or 50 feet out from each foul pole, then it was, all of a sudden it was just a normal fence, maybe 8 feet high. So that was a distinctive trademark of that ballpark. But also out behind the outfield, there was a row of trees behind which were all these houses in the Waverly neighborhood. And so I think that was the most notable thing about Memorial Stadium. And unless you happen to be somebody who parked there and the game was a blowout and you said, hey, let's beat the traffic. Well, you couldn't beat the traffic because your car was surrounded by other cars. There weren't like just your car and then a car on the other side, and then you just back out into the lane. There was no lane. All the cars were just packed in together, and you couldn't leave until all the cars around you left. So I remember people would say, man, the fans here, they really stay to the bitter end at these games. Yeah, like, well, what else are they going to do? They can't get to their car, or they could sit in the car and go nowhere and listen to it on the radio, I guess. But Memorial Stadium was a cool ballpark. But I always remember Joe Morgan was the Hall of Fame player, and he played in one of the most famous World Series of all time, '75, with the Red Sox and Reds, Big Red Machine. He always told me, he says, I really wanted to play the Orioles. I didn't want to play the Red Sox at Fenway. I wanted to play the Orioles at Memorial Stadium because that's where some of the best teams in the 60s and 70s played. And for me, that was the feature that I loved about that ballpark. That's where Frank Robinson, Brooks Robinson, Boog Powell, Jim Palmer, Dave McNally, Mike Cuellar, all these great players, that's where they played. And the Red Sox had more of a checkered history. They had some great teams, they had some bad teams, they had disappointing teams and whatnot. And Memorial Stadium did not have the history that Fenway had. It didn't have a big wall in left. But for one of the greatest players of all time, Joe Morgan, for him, he really coveted the idea of playing there because of all the great teams and great players that had played there. So, and I think that was the main calling card for Memorial Stadium. The most memorable thing for me that ever happened there, and certainly there were great teams. The first year I was there, they won the World Series, 1983. and it was sort of the last hurrah for that group of players. But the final game, Charles Steinberg had concocted this genius idea of the game was over, they had some ceremonies, they had a camera down at Camden Yards, they had some picks and shovels, and the grounds crew took out home plate at Memorial Stadium. They put it into a limo and took it down to Camden Yards. And Jim McKay, the great sports broadcaster from ABC Sports, one of the most famous sports broadcasters in television history, he was down there. He's a Baltimore guy. And so when the home plate arrived and they installed it at Camden Yards, they put that on a satellite link on the big scoreboard at Memorial Stadium. The people cheered and went nuts and whatnot. And then after all these ceremonies now, it was very quiet, and the music, the stirring music from the movie called The Field of Dreams, you know, a very sort of, you know, stirring kind of music, dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, you know, whatever. And all of a sudden, there was no announcement ever made. Brooks Robinson, in his old uniform, pops up out of the Oriole dugout and runs over to third base. And the place goes nuts. Brooksy. And then Frank Robinson, same thing, in his uniform, runs out across the field out to right field. I mean, even talking about it now, it kind of brings a tear to my eye. I mean, it makes me emotional even just remembering it, but because there was not a dry eye in the house by then. They're cheering, and then everybody's just overjoyed at all these great memories of these guys. And then one after the other, Boog Powell runs over to first base, and one after the other, all these Orioles greats from the history. Jim Palmer runs out to the mound, one ovation after another. And in various positions, and this went on for a while. You know, Davy Johnson ran over to second base, and then the second baseman who was there before Davy Johnson, he runs over. Mark Belanger runs out to shortstop, an all-time great Orioles short, and that's what happened. And the place just kept cheering and crying about all the great memories. And I think that the genius that's what your memory of that ballpark was. Those guys and those great players and great teams, because that was the Baltimore Oriole brand, to use a marketing term from now. The Orioles were not in the biggest city, they weren't in the biggest market, but they had, and Mel Allen, the great voice of the Yankees from the 30s into the 60s, when the Yankees were the great dynasty in sports history. And he said, you know, that was the Yankees back in the day, but the dynasty now for the last 20-something years is here in Baltimore. This is the team that's good every year, going back to '66 when the Orioles won their first World Series, and a contender every year right up through this '83 when they won the World Series. The last time that they won it, which was the first year I got there, which was pretty lucky if you're a broadcaster to arrive in a year that they win it all. But so anyway, so those are I think the primary memories I have of Memorial Stadium.
Yeah, we talked to the guy who dug out the home plate, but we didn't know about the players running on the field like that.
Oh, it's incredible. Just to see the Brooksy come out, the music just started playing, and nobody knew what was going on. Because it's just totally quiet, and then all of a sudden there's Brooksy. No announcement, no announcement needed, and you could see, even if you didn't have a good view from your seat, they had the big Diamond Vision high definition screen out in the outfield, and they had the shot of Brooksy popping up out of the dugout. And I remember before that last game, another moment that I kind of cherished, just having seen it, was they had a first ball ceremony, and Brooks Robinson came out, of course, but also Johnny Unitas came out, the legendary quarterback of the Baltimore Colts, because that stadium was the home of the Colts as well. So Brooks stood right next to Johnny U, which was incredible to see those two greats of Baltimore sports, legends, side by side. And then Brooks threw a baseball, and Johnny Unitas threw a football for the first ball ceremony from the two of them. And so that was just so cool. And you know, and that was sort of the legends of Baltimore sports, what Baltimore was known for as a sports town.
Yeah, definitely. And when you were switching stadiums as a broadcaster, what were the two broadcast booths like between the stadiums? Was it night and day? Was Camden a lot easier to work in? What was that like?
Well, Memorial Stadium, you know, it was a great broadcast location, a great booth, and it was huge. My daughters, because when I first came to the Orioles, there was a divorce going on, and the girls were living with me, and in the final month of that season, more often than not, the kids came with me to the ballpark because I didn't have a babysitter for them yet. And so my little one, she was 2.5 years old, and she would end up with her pillow and blanket, and she'd sit right behind me at the feet of the engineer and the guy keeping the out-of-town scoreboard and whatnot, and she'd pass out and sleep. And her older sister, who was, I don't know, she was 7 maybe, she'd have her books and her Dr. Seuss and her art supplies and whatever. And that's what they did. They were at the ballpark all the time. So, and there was plenty of room for that in that ballpark because those booths were huge. But at Camden Yards, we had an excellent broadcast location, and I do remember as time went on, then the kind of history that the Orioles created at Memorial Stadium, that's the thing you didn't have at Camden Yards. It's brand new. It's something that is never been seen before, this jewel in downtown Baltimore. But at the same time, there hadn't been any baseball history made there yet. Hadn't been any World Series yet as we all moved in. But you know, by 1995 we had you know, Cal Ripken and the streak and putting the banners up. The same guy who concocted the ceremonies with Brooksy and Frank and all the great old players popping out of the dugout at Memorial Stadium, he came up with the idea for putting the rule up on the board, and he found this very stirring music. Who was that guy that the music? He used to be on that show, the TV show, the Hollywood show with Mary Hart. What was that guy's name? I don't know. But yeah, sorry, I can't remember it. But John Tesh. So Charles came up with this idea. The rule: no game is an official game until either 4.5 innings have been played if the home team's ahead, or 5 innings if the home team's behind, or the game is tied. And only at that point is it an official game, and all the statistics and records of the game go into the official record book. So, meaning, just because Cal showed up and he's healthy to start the game, it's not the next game toward Lou Gehrig's record until it's an official game. And that was sort of the dilemma with any other baseball record, the home run record, Pete Rose breaking the all-time record for hits. When the guy hits the home run, there's the moment, there's the record. When he gets the hit, there's the record. Cal, he woke up, he wasn't sick, he didn't get hit by a car, he showed up, the team takes the field, and that's the record, you know. So, no, Charles saw that, no, it's not an official record until the 5 innings, or 4.5 if the O's are ahead, have been played. So they put the record up there in the, I think the first time they did it, and Cal didn't like it. They did it the homestand before to set this up, what they were going to do. And Cal was unhappy about it because he felt like he's being singled out and it wasn't right because they're in the middle of a game. But they put this up on the board, people have time to read it, and the music is playing. It's John Tesh music, which is very stirring, and it builds to a crescendo. And then when it hit the ultimate crescendo, the banner would unfurl for the new number. So like the night that he broke Gehrig's record, the 21:30, it said 21:30, and then the one unfurled 21:31, and the music, da-da, you know, and everybody's cheering and the big ovation and whatnot. So that's the moment. And I remember being asked to go. David Letterman had the late night show on CBS, and the producer asked me earlier that day if I would go on during batting practice when they taped the show. And they wanted to ask me, David Letterman asked me, says, now the show will be airing after he's broken the record, but we're taping it before. Maybe you can tell us what you're going to say when he breaks the record. And this was something that they had already written and concocted, so I'll be happy to, David. Now the Orioles take the field for tonight's game. And there's Cal heading out to shortstop. He's there, and that's the record. And it got a big laugh at the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York, so I thought, okay, all right. So, but that was the dilemma, and that was what Charles had fixed with this idea with the big banners, and so that was the moment. And Cal said, the night I break the record, they did it first the night before when he tied the record. They had some ceremonies after the game. And asked me to go down and MC those ceremonies. And the next night, same thing. Cal said, whatever ceremonies you want after the game, I'll do whatever you want. But not during the game. Can't do it in the middle of the game. It's not right, just doesn't respect the game. And so they didn't schedule anything. What they didn't understand was going to happen was that the fans themselves held their own impromptu celebration after it became official. And Cal had just hit a home run. So now the game's official. Cal's in the dugout. He hit a home run. President Clinton is on the radio broadcast with me. Cal hits the homer, and he's cheering for Cal. The first fan in the country is cheering on Cal. So now the fans start cheering. He's got the record. So Cal pops up out of the dugout and waves, touches his heart, and goes back in the dugout. The fans just kept cheering. And two of his veteran teammates, Bobby Bonilla and Rafael Palmeiro, said, you need to go run a lap to acknowledge everybody because they're not going to stop. And Cal said, I would never make it. But we didn't know. Cal was running a fever. He was sick. He hadn't slept a proper night for a week or 2 weeks, whatever, with all the stuff swirling around him. And he was getting up at 7 in the morning, breakfast with the kids, and then taking them to school, and going through, trying to have a semblance of normalcy. So when he said he wouldn't make it, he wasn't kidding. He was not well. But he came up out of the dugout 3 or 4 times, and then finally, they kept telling him, you need to go. And then they just shoved him out of the dugout. So reluctantly, off he went. And for me, that's the greatest celebration, that the fans held it themselves. It was just between them and Cal. So this was the first historic and greatest early moment for me at Camden Yards. There were home runs and walk-off homers, and there were great pitching performance. There were great things were happening, but that was the historic moment that forever will always be associated with Camden Yards. And there have been many since then. But the fans stopped that game. It must have been 15 minutes or more. And the cheering went on it's the longest sustained ovation of loud cheering that I've ever seen or heard in a sporting event or anywhere else in the world. So, and Cal went around, he's high-fiving it with people and waving to everybody and acknowledging everybody. And when he got around to left center by the Orioles bullpen, Elrod Hendricks, who had known Cal since Cal was a little kid, because Cal, his dad had been a minor league manager for the Orioles. So Cal grew up, they would leave for Aberdeen when school was out, and they'd go to wherever his dad was working. And Cal would go out and he'd shag with the guys on the team, and he grew up with all those guys, and especially Elrod Hendricks. And so for me, it was a sort of a beautiful moment when Elrod reached over and to give Cal a high five or whatever, and they had a moment out there together, because I think Elrod was as proud of him as if he were his own son. So anyway, so that was, I think, something that will always be linked in my mind with Camden Yards.
I want to ask you about Ed Williams.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it earlier, but since you had more of a personal relationship with him, did you personally ever think he might move the team?
Well, I always felt that Edward Bennett Williams intended for the team to stay in Baltimore, but I think he also knew as a negotiator that he felt like they needed, for the long term, a new ballpark. That signing a contract for another long-term lease at Memorial Stadium was not going to get that done. And I was always astounded, because people would say he kept holding that over the team, and that was wrong, blah, blah, blah. Well, and he truly was dying of cancer. And I was always astounded that he was really on his deathbed when he signed that deal. Why? I mean, this was going to be in his estate to his wife and his children, his heirs. And maybe the whole thing would have been worth even more money if they didn't have that deal already signed and sealed to keep the team there. But he made sure that it was signed and sealed before he died. So for me, Edward Bennett Williams is a huge part of Camden Yards and why it got built. Larry Lucchino was his protege, a young guy in his law firm in Washington, who became the legal counsel for the Washington Redskins when Edward Bennett Williams was the president of the Redskins before he ever bought the Orioles. Always a great sports fan. So, and Lucchino was not just his protege, but Lucchino also was the guy who had the vision, who hired Janet Marie Smith and saying, we're not in any hurry to get this moved along. We just want to do it right. And he did it right. And then later he did it right again in San Diego. Was in San Diego when they got their Petco Park deal, which is a San Diego version of Camden Yards. Very, very similar thing. And before that, even at Fenway Park, so maybe I had that backwards, in case I have it backwards. After that, he moved on to Boston, to Fenway Park with the Red Sox. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the Red Sox finally won a World Series for the first time in 86 years when Larry Lucchino came in and was running the show with the owner, John Henry. Lucchino is a very brilliant mind and a very brilliant person, but for years it was assumed, and by previous Red Sox ownership, Fenway was going to have to go. We love it, but it's going to have to go. And they had plans, an artist rendering and whatnot, for very close to Fenway to build a new modern ballpark that would have the same dimensions as Fenway and a lot of the big wall in left field, and would be very much like Fenway, but otherwise a totally modern ballpark, because Fenway's just not going to make it. And Lucchino hired architects to come in and do a study, and the architects said, no, I think there are things we can do and retrofit this park where it could go for another 100 years or whatever, whatever the term was. And Lucchino says, well, that's what we want. If you think that can happen, then let's do it. And they put a lot of money into the Fenway. and they put in the monster seats in left field, or in Boston they call it the monster seats in left field. They put out it's kind of a beer garden on the roof in right field. They added more to the rooftop box seats, and so they did a lot of things at Fenway, but they also strengthened it and did retrofit it so that even though Fenway's, in baseball terms, an ancient ballpark, an ancient venue, it's still very up to date in terms of its underpinnings and what's holding it up. So Lucchino, and he was the right-hand man for Edward Bennett Williams. And for me, they should both always be remembered by Orioles fans because of Camden Yards. That's, for me, is their legacy.
And with Ed Williams, do you think what would be his thoughts if he got to see Camden Yards today?
I think he would still be proud of it if he were to walk into Camden. Maybe not so much a couple years ago where they, in a very bizarre, and I think they did it for good reasons, that they thought it was hurting their pitchers, that it was a little too cozy, and they just came in with like a hammer and a chisel and cut out all these seats in left field in a very bizarre fashion. Here you had this jewel of a ballpark, and they started taking a hammer and a chisel to it. Is that the way you want to do that? I don't think so. Now, I know this year I saw from their opening day that the new owner has turned that architecturally into something a little easier on the eye out there in left field. So, and I haven't seen it in person, but hopefully that now it's not as deep as it was, but still, I think, fair for a right-hand hitter. If you hit one now, you earn it. But and if you're a pitcher, there's no cheap home runs. So hopefully that's the case. But at least now, architecturally, it looks like they actually intended that instead of, oh my God, what happened? Was there an earthquake, or what? The beautiful ballpark. And one of my favorite memories was the year the All-Star game was there, and it must have been '93, so maybe the second year of Camden Yards. And they asked me to be the MC for the Home Run Derby, which in those days took place right after the batting practice on the Monday, and ESPN televised it by tape, and they ran it that night. So I was on field as the MC. So Juan Gonzalez, the great slugger for the Texas Rangers of that time, and guys were hitting these. I think Ken Griffey Jr. is the only guy ever to hit one that hit the warehouse in right field, which we didn't see, but that we were told that it did, and I was there right next to home plate when he hit it. It's like, whoa, and we got word, at which they had me announced that apparently that he did hit the warehouse. Then Gonzalez hit one to left field, and from my angle, I was to the right of home plate. I saw it leave his bat, and it was just breathtaking watching it soar out toward left field. It cleared the wall, it cleared the lower deck, it cleared the second deck, and hit the facade of the upper deck. It's the only time I ever saw anybody do that, and it was, it was the Home Run Derby. But so I think the Camden Yards is still a place, if you're an Orioles fan, I think still a place to be proud of.
And for someone like me, who I wasn't alive when Ed Williams was alive, what would you want those people to know about him as a person?
Say that again?
Like, kind of, what would you want someone who doesn't know who Edward Bennett Williams is, what would you want them to know about him?
Edward Bennett Williams was a great Washington attorney, and he was a defense attorney. So some people who had very big legal problems wanted to hire him. And he was so famous as a Washington attorney that if you go back to the 50s and 60s and look up movies with great attorneys who get hired for these cases where somebody looks like they're guilty and they're really going to do serious time or whatever, these attorneys, these miracle worker type attorneys that never lose, they were always all based on Edward Bennett Williams. That's who he was, just in real life. And he would be sought by presidents and invited to the White House so that they could pick his brain about certain things. And one of the moments I'll never forget with him was sitting in this tiny little press room at Memorial Stadium in 1983. The Orioles are in a 7-game losing streak in August. It was the second 7-game losing streak of the year. They ended up winning 98 games and they ended up winning the World Series. But he came in and he asked if I would mind if he sat with me. They had these little booths, like picnic tables, in this little press room. You could get a burger and a crab cake or French fries, and that was about the only thing you could get in that press room. The crab cakes were very authentic, very Baltimore crab cakes. And I kind of laughed. He asked if I mind if he sat with me. I said, "Are you kidding? I'd be honored if you'd sit with me." And he said, "You know, this losing streak, I am so down. And I think I'm more down about this losing streak than anything I can remember in my life." And I laughed. I was like, wow. But I said, well, but I think that we're all assuming that this team is really good and that they're still going to get through this and that they're still going to win. And he says, well, why do you say that? What's the evidence? They're in a losing streak at the worst possible time. And and I don't even remember what it was I told him. So then that night of all nights, the Orioles had this game with Toronto. And Toronto was good, but they didn't have a really good bullpen. But the Orioles go to the bottom of the 9th inning. This is 1983. And they're behind 3-1 or whatever it was, and 4-1. So Joe Altobelli's the manager. He starts pinch hitting, trying to generate some offense to keep this game going. Well, they tie the game, and they send it to the 10th inning. But he's used everybody. He doesn't have a catcher. So Len Sakata, who was a utility infielder, who was 5'6" tall, he comes out to be the catcher for the 10th inning. And the equipment is too big. They don't have any equipment that fits him. And he looked like, all of a sudden, a little leaguer. The Orioles were going to use this guy who's 12 years old as the catcher. And we had two outfielders, John Lowenstein and Gary Renicky, who platooned in left field. They are both in the game. And Lowenstein's playing second base and Renicky's playing third, or vice versa. We have two outfielders playing second base and third base because we're out of players. And it doesn't matter anyway. The first batter for the Blue Jays hits a home run and they're right back ahead. And so now we bring in, the next guy gets a base hit. There's a guy at first. We bring in Tippy Martinez, left-hander, to pitch. He was usually our closer. And well, these guys, they cannot wait, because when Len Sakata threw the ball down to second base after he warmed up the pitcher, it bounced like 3 times. The equipment was so big he couldn't just, and they told him, says, do not throw the ball out to second base. After you warm him up, call time and run the ball out to the pitcher. Just don't. Len was like,